And we continue to reflect on our first 100 days with a look back at some of our most impactful interviews from Washington with members of Congress, cabinet secretaries, and a non-traditional leader who's making big waves. Now, I know that following the federal government can sometimes be frustrating because it seems like not much is getting done. And yes, we talk about that quite a bit on this show. But as pollster Terrence Woodbury pointed out recently on this show, that actually couldn't be further from the truth. The messy politics aside, the reality is that day in and day out, the bureaucracy churns, and the government is now more functional and for the people than it has been in years. And that's because it's more diverse and representative of our communities than ever before. I've interviewed several of the leaders who are pushing the envelope and blocking and tackling on our behalf each day. And while they all bring rich policy acumen and political insight, my takeaway from almost every conversation that we have is that these folks, the people who are doing the good deeds of democracy and are often demonized for it, are simply human too. So here are some of my favorite moments. Representative Stacey Plaskett was going about her business on the Hill on January 6, 2020, when rioters stormed the Capitol. She then went on to serve as one of the lawyers that managed the impeachment trial to hold Donald Trump accountable. I spoke with her about the emotion and the stages of grief that swept over her that day. Take a listen. I wonder for you, delegate, who is there trying to do the people's work, how did all of this make you feel? Were you angered by what was taking place?
Of course, anger is a nice way of putting how it made me feel. I could think of some stronger words than that, because so many of us, you know, as an individual of African descent in this country, we have had our own frustrations. We have had our own anger at how this country has treated us, and yet we do not attempt to overthrow our government. What we do is try and work within the framework of democracy to make change.
You know, Delegate Plaskett reminds us that despite it all, we as Black people always end up mustering the will to rise above with dignity and with grace. Now, we have every right to be angry, as she expressed, but we should just rage at the ballot box. In this next conversation, I spoke with Congressman Jeffries about how he went from perpetual outsider to consummate insider in the Democratic Party. He shared his advice for others who hope to do the same. What do you say to people coming behind you that might be as inspired as you, taking the same path, pushing against the establishment and the grain to then become a part of the establishment? What do you say to them, and how do you reconcile that as a leader of the party?
It's a great question, and I think, one, that I encourage young people to run for something, to follow your passions, and if that's your interest, if you want to make a difference, it is important to follow that passion. Even if there's a sitting member of Congress or the legislature or the city council standing in your way. Based on the experience that I've had, I will never be the individual to discourage anybody from running a primary against anyone who currently may be there. I did that myself.
I gotta say, I was so pleasantly surprised that Congressman Jeffries was so unapologetic about his support for primary challengers, given how fraught the party politics have been around all of this. You might remember that a few years ago, a few cycles ago, the DCCC actually put a ban on consultants who were supporting challenger races to sitting Democrats because the progressive wing of the party has been working to offset some of the more conservative wing of the party and have been winning those primaries at getting rid of the old guard who isn't doing a whole lot, frankly, for people of color. And so to hear a leader in the party actually condone those primaries was a pretty big deal in that interview. And it reminded me, too, in the whole conversation, Congressman Jeffries, you know, reminded us that he, too, was just an upstart with a passion for change. And in fact, he ran for office and lost 3 times before he finally got elected to the state legislature. He started from the bottom and now he's here. And he is a front runner for the future Speaker of the House. Pretty big deal. Nurse Cori Bush was on the front lines in Ferguson, leading the protest around the police killing of 18-year-old Michael Brown. And she is now among a new generation in Congress putting on her activist hat to challenge the establishment. Here she is.
One thing that I said when I first came to Congress, actually before I was sworn in, I said that I wouldn't take off my activist hat. You know, I'm not going to put, you know, who I am as an activist on the shelf to be able to be a congresswoman. I married the two together, so I'm a politivist sitting in Congress. And so I bring that, you know, with activists, there is that pressure. There is that courage to stand alone if you have to. There is that the heart of the organizer. And so that's what I'm bringing to Congress, and I want to continue to do that.
She is a politivist sitting in Congress. I absolutely love the activist spirit of so many of the newer generation of members who call themselves activist legislators and who are warriors for the people. It makes me think about the legacy of Congressman John Lewis, who has since passed, but certainly was one of those folks who came in and said, we're going to keep fighting like we're in the streets, but we're going to do that now here on Capitol Hill. You know, the politics just don't get much more personal than that. And the work ain't easy, y'all. In that interview, we actually talked about with Congresswoman Bush how her car had been shot up because she still lives in the hood where she's always lived and experiences the same things that the people in her community experience. And of course, there's the nasty attacks and even the death threats that pour in against members like her and her colleague, Representative Ilhan Omar. They continue to hold their heads high, though, and do the work despite the hostility and despite the dangers. Here's Congresswoman Omar.
There is a drastic need in America for us to work together and for us to deliver. And if we fail to do that, we are not only going to be punished in the midterms and lose our majority, but we ultimately would have failed in delivering our promise to the American people.
As the first Muslim American woman in Congress, Representative Omar is frequently a target for hate. You know all of the nasty things that have been said about her, to her, tweeted about her, the death threats that have happened because people have just been incensed that there's a Muslim woman sitting in Congress. It is really vile and disgusting. And we've seen now some of the Republican members finally, you know, getting slapped on the wrist and or being censured because of the hate that they are spreading. But the thing I took away from this interview is that here she is still appealing to our common humanity, despite it all, and is, you know, issuing pleas for us to work together. And I have to say that I believe that her posture is as much a testament to her politics as it is her faith. And to see a member of Congress wearing a hijab in Congress is culturally groundbreaking, huge deal. In fact, the body just passed a new rule for the first time in 181 years that allows head coverings to be worn on the House floor because of her when she was elected. The representation matters, y'all. And so many of our communities now get to see themselves reflected back in our nation's leadership for the first time, including gay parents. Check this out. First, I want to just say congratulations because you are the new father of twins. Congratulations to you and Chasten. You look good. Fatherhood looks good on you. How are you doing? And how are you leaning into this new role?
Well, you know, it's been great. It's demanding. It's one of the most demanding things I've ever done. We're definitely not sleeping much. We're resorting to a shift system so that we can cover down with our twins. But they're just such an incredible blessing, and also a reminder as I've been able to take some time to really focus on supporting my husband and raising these kids, that every American deserves that. And this administration believes in making it easier to raise kids in this country, which is a big part of the president's Build Back Better agenda.
Just wow. Just wow. Let us never forget how significant this is. That for the first time, we have a gay dad as a sitting cabinet member. And I don't remember the last time that a sitting cabinet member actually took paternity leave, because that's also a big deal too. I so appreciate that Secretary Buttigieg now gets the challenges of being a working parent, because there's nothing like real life experience to inform policymaking, and that is why diversity at the table matters. And that's exactly what the Native American community has in the historic appointment of Secretary Deb Haaland. She is the first Native person to head up the Department of the Interior, which controls all of the public land in the United States, land that was stolen from Indigenous people.
Native American history is American history, right? This is the history of our country, and long before we had the United States of America, it was a continent full of thousands of diverse Indian tribes.
It was a continent full of diverse Indian tribes way before it was the United States of America. And it is so powerful to have her sitting there in that office, reframing the narrative and helping to restore the legacy of her people. Amazing. And finally, I want to share with you the most moving interview that I've actually ever conducted. I had the privilege of speaking with Joel Castone, the first ever inmate to secure public office while still incarcerated in a DC jail. Here he talks about redemption and the power of reframing the narrative. Listen to this.
What we've done is that we actually eradicated the word inmate. I want to point that out. We want to say that we are incarcerated people, and we think that labeling is very important. So what they did in DC, they called us returning citizens, right? Now look at the language here, returning citizens. Now my pastor said, you're not just a returning citizen, you are a redemptive person. That changed the narrative altogether, because we begin to look at how our souls has been redeemed. It's a mindset. So in that mindset here in DC, what we decided to do is say, not only want to say that incarcerated people should have a voice, incarcerated people with humanity should be recognized too.
Incarcerated people's humanity should be recognized. Wow. Every time my team and I go back and watch that interview, we all swoon. And sometimes I just get so choked up. As you could see, Commissioner Castone was actually sitting there in his jail cell having this interview with us. He was recently released after serving 26 years in jail. We did catch up with him also after he came home. And today he's out there busy doing the work of the people in his position as commissioner there in D.C. I highly encourage you all to go to BNC's YouTube page and watch the full interviews. You can also find all of our shows at the BNC YouTube page. They're under the Amplified playlist. Commissioner Castone, certainly one of the most powerful, but we have spoken to dozens of leaders, elected, appointed, activists, folks in their communities, in their schools, in their corporations. And at the end of the day, the thread here is that if we continue to serve this nation, to serve one another, be of service to ourselves, constantly connected to the idea that we are always joined through a common humanity, well, then I think we're going to be all right.